Hey everyone, so I come to you for yet another Sunday Miscellany video, and I'm recording this the night before I'm going to post it because I'm just a little bit antsy, as I think we all are today, because obviously the big news is that it was finally announced that Joe Biden won the presidential election, and to be quite frank, I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Biden, but I am pleased that Donald Trump is out of office and Joe Biden will be a huge improvement. So, anyway, so I'm feeling antsy because of that, so I thought that I would record this the night before. It's 6:30, so I guess it's not that late, but anyway. Yeah, so this is a feature, if you haven't tuned in for the last couple weeks, this is a feature on my channel where I talk about, I give you not only a general reading update, but also talk about music that I've listened to and movies that I've watched. And so I always start these with the music, and obviously that pairs along with my reading of The Lives of the Great Composers by Harold Schonberg, and the two chapters that I read this week in this book were on Richard Wagner and Giuseppe Verdi, who are two composers who need very little introduction. They're both huge opera composers. Verdi wrote more than 30 operas. Wagner only wrote a handful, but they're both titans in the genre, and I love them both. I love them both. There are a lot of people who, will say that, I'm a Wagnerian or I'm a Wagnerite, and there will be other people who say, no, I'm a Verdian, I like Verdi. And these two camps are often seen as, in opposition, but you can actually love them both, as I do. And I would say that ultimately my preferred one is Wagner. Mostly because I just find his music a lot more profound, a lot more consistently profound than Verdi's, whereas Verdi's is a lot more pretty, it's much more ornamental, much more in the Italian style, and obviously because he's Italian, but it's so good in that vein, and it has a kind of cinematic quality to it, and a lot of his music does transcend that sort of superficially pretty music that I associate with other Italian composers like Rossini and Donizetti and others. And Wagner's, I think his operas, the stories tend to be better. They tend to be more interesting, and so I tend to prefer them. The stories of operas in general aren't like super, aren't the kind of stories that would necessarily hold up as like a work of literature often, because so much of what an opera is held up by the music. But anyway, the story does matter for me, and when it comes to opera, I prefer an opera that has both components, has a good story plus great music. That is like the ultimate opera for me. And there are operas I do like that have great music and a subpar story, but it's rare that there's an opera where the story is great and the music isn't so good, because it is ultimately a musical art form. Like, the music has to be good for it to be good. So opera can't just survive on the basis of its story. But anyway, that whole spiel aside about Verdi and Wagner, I have a playlist, as always, of the music that I listen to by the two of them. It will be linked. It's a Spotify playlist. It'll be linked below. You can go check it out. It's probably, in terms of the Verdi selections, it's probably a little bit different because it doesn't include some of his most famous operas. It didn't include any Otello, which is his operatic adaptation of, obviously, the Shakespeare play, because I haven't listened to that one, actually. I listened to a lot of Verdi, but not that one. And it doesn't include Falstaff, either, which is also a Shakespeare adaptation of The Merry Wives of Windsor, which I just don't particularly like. And it also doesn't include Macbeth, which I have watched and listened to, but I haven't recent enough to feel confident to pick out my favorite parts. So there is some Verdi. There's a lot of Rigoletto, there's some La Traviata, probably my favorite Verdi opera, there's a little bit of Il Trovatore, and then some overtures to two of his less famous operas, which are Un ballo in maschera and Louisa Miller. And yeah, I love them all, so they're there. And Wagner, there's a pretty basic selection. I have Tristan and Isolde, a bunch from that, a bunch from the Ring Cycle, a little bit from Parsifal, the Overture to Parsifal, and a little bit from Tannhäuser. So those are in the playlist, and also in the playlist I included a band, another post-rock band called God is an Astronaut, who do post-rock, similar to Mono, who I talked about last week, but who do post-rock in a very different style from them. The title, the name of the band, God is an Astronaut, I think is very fitting, because their music does feel a lot like you're sort of traveling through space. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, give them a listen. I think they're really good. They're Irish, actually, so just a little tidbit about them. Another thing I wanted to share with you today that's quite exciting is a little music hall. I actually, on Thursday, when the election craziness was at its height, I decided to get my mind off things by going to the Goodwill and seeing what they had. The Goodwill, very close to me, requires masks, by the way, so, you know, you're pretty safe there, and obviously I wore a mask and everything, but this Goodwill often has gems. You know, you don't go into the Goodwill expecting great stuff in books or music, but this Goodwill often has gems. I found a lot of bookish gems there, but this time around I found some musical gems, and I thought that I would just show them off for you because it's quite exciting. And I've listened to a few of them already, but I will try to listen to all of them. First off, we have this, which is Handel's Messiah. This is Highlights. It is with the Westminster Choir, and it's conducted by Leonard Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic. That's the Messiah, which everyone knows and loves, and as I do. This next one is Tchaikovsky and Mendelssohn, their violin concertos. They both only wrote one violin concerto, and I've only listened to Mendelssohn's violin concerto, but I do love it. This next one is Stravinsky. This is the Firebird Suite in Petrushka, complete, conducted by Leonard Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic. Haven't listened to much Stravinsky, but excited to get more into his work. This is Ave Maria, a collection of a bunch of different versions of Ave Maria. So it has the Ave Maria by Palestrina, Bruckner, Fauré, Schubert, you know, Mendelssohn, Bach and Gounod, and so on. A bunch of different composers. I listened to this tonight, really nice. And another a Handel piece is Water Music and Royal Fireworks Music. This is Pierre Boulez with the New York Philharmonic. Yeah, I do like Handel. I do like that album quite a bit. I also listened to that one earlier in the week. I quite enjoy. It's very good background music, I find, with Handel. This next one is Fantasia on Greensleeves. So this is the work of Ralph Vaughan Williams, Delius, Elgar, Warlock, and Butterworth. And this is, yeah, just a collection of works by these different composers. I don't know too much about any of them, but again, it's so cheap that why not just take a chance on it, you know? It might end up being something I really like. Next one is a composer I've never heard of. This is Diamond Music by Carl Jenkins with the London Philharmonic and the Smith Quartet. Again, haven't really heard of this composer, but I was just intrigued to see. I'm always intrigued when I come across a composer who I've just never heard of, and so I will give this a try. This next one is Edvard Grieg. This is Lyric Pieces performed on Grieg's piano at the composer's villa. I've only listened to a very little bit of Grieg. And we have Bizet. This is L'Arlésienne and Carmen. I love Carmen. I've never heard of the other one. I'm not even sure if it's an opera or what, but yeah, I love Bizet's Carmen. And then we have Beethoven's Fifth and Schubert's Eighth. This is the New York Philharmonic, conducted again by Leonard Bernstein. I love Beethoven's Fifth, and I really like Schubert's Eighth, although I've only listened to it once. So. And then next we have some Bach. This is just sort of a collection, an eclectic collection of some of his music. It has excerpts from a bunch of his works, but I love Bach, so why not? And then we have a Brahms Festival. It has his entire Symphony No. 1, variations on a theme by Haydn, and Hungarian dances 1 through 3. And yeah, and then finally, one to find that I was really excited for. This is Rachmaninoff, his Symphony No. 2. I do love Rachmaninoff. His piano concertos are the shit, basically. I love them. And this is his second symphony, and I listened to it the other day. Quite good. So that's a music hall, and obviously I've already mentioned the lives of the great composers in terms of my reading update. I'm also continuing on with the Oxford Anthology of African American Poetry, but no big updates there. I finished Ariel by Sylvia Plath, and I posted a review video. When I'm recording this, it was early this morning, but when you see this, it'll be the day before. So I'll leave a link to that review, but I highly recommend Sylvia Plath, one of my favorite poets. She's an incredibly oral poet, I think, a very gripping poet. I find her poems just sonically so engaging, and her images so complex and beautiful. So yeah, I recommend that. I'm obviously continuing with the Histories of Herodotus. I have now reached book 7. So this is the part of the Histories where we're really getting into the Greco-Persian War, where the Persian Empire is attacking mainland Greece, and we're about to get to the part where you have the whole Battle of Thermopylae, where the 300 Spartans, although it was actually more than 300, defend this tiny little pass against like an army of hundreds of thousands, and so on and so forth. So it's really the kind of climax of the histories that he's been leading up to. And I gotta say, it's actually a bit more confusing this section, because the earlier sections were so much sort of ethnography and geography and cultural studies, there were a lot less sort of names of people and names of locations and past events that you had to sort of keep in your head and keep track of to know what's going on. Whereas now that he's more into like the nitty-gritty of historical events with this war, you know, you need to keep track of many different names, you need to keep track of many different locations, and you need to sort of have some crucial past events in your mind to understand the relations between different city-states, between different people, and so on and so forth. And that's really confusing. It was really confusing when I was reading Thucydides, and it's really confusing here. But it's a bit better in this case than with Thucydides. Thucydides was just dreadful. But that's not killing my enjoyment. I'm still really liking it, and I'm realizing that I just love learning about the ancient Mediterranean. You know, I just love being in that world, and so yeah, this is just driving home for me that I need to also start reading other history books about ancient Greece and Rome, you know, like modern history books. So I will do that at some point. And then I've obviously continued with John Brown, Abolitionist, my buddy read with Patrice Jones. Still going very well, still very interesting, but not much new to report. We are finally, now that we're just more than halfway through, we're now finally to the part where we get to the Harper's Ferry raid, which is obviously very interesting. And then I started 2 more books this week, which was probably a bit of a mistake, but one is actually fiction. This is Tracks by Louise Erdrich, and Louise Erdrich is an extremely famous Chippewa writer, and this is her 3rd published novel, I believe. And it's the 2nd or 3rd novel in her Love Medicine series, which is sort of a series of books that aren't necessarily like chronological, don't necessarily like, you don't need to read them in order or anything, but they are all about the same sort of extended family on a Chippewa reservation in North Dakota. And this novel is about a few different characters. It's about one character named Fleur Pillager, who has sort of a connection to this lake spirit near her house. It's also it's from the perspective of a young woman named Pauline and an old man named whose last name is Nanapush. I'm blanking on his first name. But basically, it's just the sort of story of these people's lives, and it takes place in the early 20th century, and it's very beautifully written. I'm not entirely certain what to make of it yet. The characters haven't really leapt out at me all that much, and there's a lot of sort of what the characters refer to as medicine in it, sort of supernatural charms that they use to manipulate other people and so on, and at a couple crucial points there is this sort of fantastical element to it, and I don't quite know what to make of that. I suppose in the universe of the novel, all that is just taken for granted. But yeah, so I don't quite know what to make of it yet, but I am liking it. I'm going to finish it tomorrow. And then the other book I started was Crow Dog, 4 Generations of Sioux Medicine Men by Leonard Crow Dog and Richard Erdoes. So Leonard Crow Dog was a significant leader in the American Indian Movement, or AIM as its acronym is known, which was the civil rights movement for Native Americans that sort of came about around the same time as the civil rights movement for African Americans in the United States, as well as many other movements in the 1970s. And so he was a major leader in that movement, and in the occupation of Wounded Knee, and the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C., and so on. And he himself is a Lakota, and this is a memoir of his life, both before and during and after he was part of AIM, and also kind of mini biographies of his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. And they were all what white people call medicine men, but they have their own word for it. And so it kind of is supposed to give insight into Lakota spiritual practices. You know, Leonard Crow Dog was very involved in the revival of Native American spirituality with the Native American church, the founding of the Native American church. And his grandfather was involved in the ghost dance, for example. And so it's kind of an insight into Lakota life in the late 19th and early 20th century, and about Native American religion and so on, and about this political movement that he was a member of. And I'm not too far into it, not quite halfway, so I haven't gotten all that much out of it yet, but I'm enjoying it. It's interesting to get a look at life in those times, which is extremely difficult, as it was for most Native nations at the time and still. And yeah, so anyway, I'm liking this so far, to the extent that you can like such a grim subject. But I picked up both of these. I was inspired to pick up both of these for the Indigathon, which is being hosted at the moment by Brody from at 2 Brody and Michelle from Thor Wants Another Letter. I'll leave links to their announcement videos for that, but that's basically a readathon in November that's in celebration of Native American Heritage Month, where these 2 booktubers encourage you to read more books by Indigenous authors. So anyway, the only thing that's left is films, and so the first film that I watched this week was a rewatch for me. This is Boyhood. It's directed by Richard Linklater. I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's from 2012 or 2014, and it's a coming-of-age story about a young boy growing up in Texas. And the big sort of gimmick with this film is that it was actually shot in real time, so rather than getting different actors to play the main character at different points in his life, they just chose a very young boy at around 2000, 2001 to play the boy when he was very young, and then they would shoot some footage then they would reconvene several years later and shoot when the boy was a bit older, and then reconvene several years later, and that was how the film was shot. And it stars L.R. Coltrane, Ethan Hawke, and Patricia Arquette. Patricia Arquette and Ethan Hawke play the parents, and Lorelei Linklater, who's the daughter of Richard Linklater, plays the main character's sister. And this is just a comfort watch for me, really. I really enjoy this movie. It's just one of those movies where it may not be the greatest movie ever made. I mean, some people might say it is, because it did get a lot of critical acclaim, but I'm not sure it is. But I just love the atmosphere, and so it's just a movie that I can just turn on and just, relax while watching, really. And this was what I watched the night of the election on Tuesday, to just keep my mind off things. I turned my phone on airplane mode at about 5 p.m. and just watched this to keep my mind off things. Yeah, so it's a good movie. I like it. And it's also very nostalgic for me, because the main character, Mason is the boy's name. Basically, his coming of age in this film and my coming of age are basically happened at the same time. I think he and I were born in the same year, basically, the actor and the boy in the fictional world. So it's very nostalgic for me in that sense, because a lot of the stuff that's going on in this movie as the boy grows up was also going on as I was coming of age, like, the election of Barack Obama, and when Lady Gaga's music comes up a couple of times in this film, and, that was nostalgic, because I was actually really into Lady Gaga in high school and these sorts of things. So it's also just nostalgic for me. So yeah, it's a comfort watch on a few different levels. And then another film that I watched that I don't have physically is called Ordinary Love, and that is directed by Lisa Barros Dessa and Glenn Leyburn. And this is about a older couple, just an older Scottish couple. It takes place in Scotland. It stars Liam Neeson and Leslie Manville, and they're just a sort of aging Scottish couple, and the woman finds out that she has breast cancer, and it's just about their relationship and their struggle with her breast cancer. Obviously, more her struggle than his struggle, but he still struggles to a degree to just sort of help take care of her and so on. And it's just really about their relationship. There's no big plot events, there's no major drama even. This is just a portrait of a very functional marriage, actually, which means that there is bickering, there are disagreements, there's an occasional fight, but they, on the whole, get along, and you just see, a portrait of a really good marriage. I mean, these two have, the sarcastic, witty banter that you get from a lot of, functional marriages, and you can just see that they sort of know each other, that they're married and they're best friends and they're there for each other and so on. And it was really touching to see them go through that struggle. And I thought it was just an incredibly, you know, quietly beautiful film. And yeah, I would highly recommend it. It's on Hulu, so, you know, I would definitely recommend you seek it out. And then the last film that I watched, I finished it just today, was The English Patient. This is directed by Anton Minghella, and it stars Ralph Fiennes, Juliette Binoche, Willem Dafoe, Kristen Scott Thomas, and Colin Firth. I'm sure most of you have heard of it, but, you know, Jason from Chapter and Verse recommended this one to me, and obviously it won like 9 Academy Awards, has a stellar cast, obviously, so it kind of also recommends itself. And I'm sure that most of you have heard of this one, but for those who haven't, it's about this person who shows up in southern Italy in the last months of World War II, who has a British accent, but whose face has been burned beyond recognition, and who can't remember anything about his past and can't remember his name. And Juliette Binoche plays a nurse taking care of him. Basically, she's nursing him to his death because it's pretty clear that he's going to die from his burns. And the English patient himself is played by Ralph Fiennes, and it's just about him sort of slowly remembering his past and its effect on Juliette Binoche's character and some other characters who appear, and also about his past story. It's a sort of illicit love affair that he had with Kristen Scott Thomas's character that took place during the starting of World War II. And yeah, I enjoyed this. It, you know, it was really well acted, obviously. It has a great cast. I thought it was a really touching story. I found it easy to watch. You know, it's not a dense film, not a heavy film, really, except that it is kind of sad. But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I could see it becoming a comfort film, kind of like Boyhood, something that I can just turn on and not think too hard about. And it's always good to have films like that. But I don't necessarily know if I think it's like a masterpiece or if it'll be like a favorite film of all time, but definitely I liked it quite a bit. So anyway, that's my Sunday Miscellany. I hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any thoughts on anything that I've discussed, and I will let you go and talk to you later. Bye.